Welcome to Teaching Heroes, a video podcast where we ask the critical question, what does it take to teach future leaders of our nation? And who do we have to be in the classroom every day to inspire humanity's tomorrow? Often in education, we talk a lot about what teachers need to do in terms of pedagogy and lesson planning, etc., which are all really important questions. And we talk about systems and they're all fantastic. But I think what's missing sometimes in this conversation is the people behind those humans that stand in front of the classroom every day. And what does it take to actually, be a teacher in today's world? Where have you been and where do you want to go as a teacher or as a future leader? And today we're going to interview Mr. Jamie Warhab. And when the concept of this video podcast came, I was developing this concept, I've thought of Jamie straight away because I've known Jamie as a principal at St Christopher's at Panania, and it's such an inspiring school to be around, lots of innovation, and it's a school that teaches the whole child. And so I'm really interested to hear how Jamie's come to that as a leader, where he's gone, and then where does he think education needs to go as well. So thank you very much for saying yes to me again, Jamie.
Pleasure, Jo.
Jamie's been a big supporter of mine as well in my work in drama education and in professional experience as a tertiary educator. So thank you once again for saying yes to me, Jamie.
It's always a pleasure, Jo, and you've always got interesting things happening, so I'm very happy to take part.
Great. So why don't you just start to tell us about St Christopher's at Panania, and you've been there 5 years now, is that right?
Yeah.
And what was your vision coming into St Christopher's, and how's that been realised?
So this is yes, I've been here 5 years, entering into my sixth year now. Mm-hmm. And I was previously principal at St Ambrose at Concord West. And so St Christopher's has always been a great school. And the directive from the regional director at the time was to sort of, I suppose, create a similar school to the one I've been working at previously at St Ambrose. At the time, St Ambrose had quite a reputation, I suppose, for lots of innovation, pushing the boundaries a bit around education and around pedagogies. And so at the time we were in different regions, and he was keen to have a similar school at St Christopher's. And so it was a very exciting time. The school underwent quite a lot of projects, both in terms of the physical environment, but also the human resource environment as well. And like any change process, there were ups and downs and highlights and stressful moments. But that's what good change is. That's what good learning is. And so it's no different.
Yeah. So because St Christopher's has such incredible agile learning spaces, and I know that there was a proposal to kind of do some agile learning spaces, but I know you kind of came in and messed that up a bit. So tell us about that, like what was important to you in those spaces for students?
Yeah, that was quite funny, really. We had there was a POMI architect who came in. I said POMI because apparently I'm one as well. Who came in and she showed me all of the sort of plans that have been created for learning streets and all this kind of stuff. And so I had a look at the plans, and she asked for some feedback. No, actually, I said, "Can I give you some feedback?"
Yeah.
And she said, "Yeah, I'd love some feedback." And I said, "Well, no offense, but I think they're crap." So we looked, so we get on very well now.
Yeah.
We did at the time, and we went right back to basics. And so I suppose for me, the most important thing when you're doing anything in a school is to make sure you know why you're doing it.
Yeah.
And you really need to come back to what's called either a vision for learning or a school-wide pedagogy. So we focused on developing a vision for learning first, and then we looked at what sort of spaces we wanted to create because of our school-wide pedagogy.
Yeah. Well, describe that a bit. I mean, and how did you come to that? How did you come to know? Was that from school experience, practical experience, pedagogy? Like, how did you know that the spaces weren't going to work and that yours were, and they do?
Probably because I'm that vain. No, it's because I guess I think at times in education we often look for silver bullets as teachers as leaders. We look for the latest fad, the latest thing that's going to solve education. And I suppose early on in my career, I realised, well, that never happens. There's never one answer. There's never one solution. And for me, Joe, it came down to really trying to give teachers as much autonomy as possible within the learning space, and then things are going to work. Because what we know about teachers is a good teacher can teach in a cardboard box. It really doesn't matter. So the principles of learning design should really be around giving the teachers as much flexibility around the space as possible, so they can be as creative as they want to be.
Yeah. And so let's describe some of the classrooms, because not everyone would have seen them. So what is it what is it about the classroom and the actual furniture that gives the teachers that flexibility?
Yeah, firstly, so we have it's still a four-walled classroom essentially, but all the classrooms have these big sliding doors that you can open or you can close. So straight away you can either have a normal four-walled classroom, or you can open up the space and have and utilize other spaces as well, whether it's a breakout space or the classroom next door.
So three streams. So you have those sliding doors on either side. So you could, it could be a 3 classroom space or 1, as you say.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a 3-stream school, and so you can have 3 classrooms all opened up, or you can have them in their own spaces. So that's kind of the very, very basic of design. And then in terms of the walls themselves, they need to be either something that's going to show some awesome work, or it's something that gives children the ability to create some work. So there's either white walls or writable walls or felt space on all the walls. Yeah. Furniture is very flexible. It can all be moved. It's different shapes. There's a lot of tables that you can write on. So again, they can be reimagined by the students, not just by the teacher, of course, and at different heights. So it makes learning more engaging for the students when they also have a choice, not just in terms of what or how they're learning, but where they're actually learning too.
Because there's different, there's different heights in tables, there's different heights in chairs, there's kind of, beanbag type spots, or there is the traditional, chair at a table kind of learning. So the students can, choose, as you say, where they're going to learn the best.
Yeah, and part of that as well is to make sure there wasn't a front of classroom, because what we know from watching any videos in the last 20 years is that we don't want stages on stages. We want teachers interacting, moving around the classroom, and very much being a part of the learning rather than a focus for the learning.
Yeah, and was there resistance from the staff, like particularly staff who might have been teaching for a long time in a kind of more traditional space? How did they go adjusting to the agile?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So it's a bit of everything. Yeah. So we started right from the beginning of asking teachers, okay, what would be your ideal lesson? What would be the best lesson? What would be happening? What did it look like? So they'll look like, sounds like, feels like. Getting the wire charts out, saying what would an awesome lesson look like, and then from there, what might the learning spaces look like? And you grab teachers when you speak in those terms. Yeah. Everyone's passionate about what a great lesson looks like.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we developed certain protocols around what we wanted to do, and as I said, school-wide pedagogy. But not everyone was on board. But there was a choice here. We were making decisions as a whole staff, coming up with solutions, and then you were either on board, or you might require some support to be on board, and that's absolutely fine. Or this wasn't going to be your cup of tea, so perhaps this wasn't going to be the learning environment for you.
Yeah, and so there was a bit of staff change, within that. Yeah,
absolutely, and we were very much looking to create a culture where it really was pure collaboration, and we were all working together across stages and grades, and with everyone having a voice. Yeah. And I suppose over the time that we went from trying to create a culture, which we achieved, to when we're interviewing these days, it's, do you want to be part of our culture?
Yeah,
It's a
right.
real sort of change in shift and thinking. And look, whether we're taking teachers around the school or whether we're taking parents around the school,
Yeah.
it's very hard to not be caught up in it all and want to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's very true. But I know because I'm a parent at St Christopher's, and so knowing, when that change was happening, I could hear things from parents around, oh, but my child, and this is the typical one that I hear is, my child is a learner that needs quiet. And so they were concerned that an agile learning space meant noise and meant then that learning wasn't happening. And I guess as an educator, I always try and, well, I mean, I do support what you do at the school, but I always try and say, well, school's not like what it was when you were a child. So how much resistance, how much conversations did you have to have with parents around, trust us, we've got this.
Yeah, another great question. Look, and I went through exactly the same thing at St Ambrose. In fact, when I was at St Ambrose, I'd have parents turn up with a file and sit there and say, "Well, I've got my research. Where's yours?" So I kind of found that a little bit exciting because
Yeah.
stimulating to be challenged.
Yeah.
As I was quite happy to be challenged because it's important that as leaders and as teachers that we go into something knowing that we're not using the children as guinea pigs. We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Certain about effective learning. And so just one of the challenges with school in general, and it's important for teachers to really understand this, is that everyone's been to school, and so everyone has an opinion of school. Now, that opinion may well be based on 20, 30, 40 years ago, but everyone has a view of whether school was successful for them or whether it wasn't successful for them. And again, in both of those camps, it comes down to, okay, well, if it was successful for me, then this style of education must be right because it was good for me. And if it was unsuccessful for me, well, this style of education can't be right because it wasn't good for me.
Yes.
So everyone gets a bit sort of egocentric when it comes to that. So you kind of accept that when you work in education. But the bottom line is you persuade parents and the community through what you do, and that is through providing engaging lessons, through having children come home and be excited about the learning. And for me, that's really the only way to do it. I think within schools, the easiest way to create any change is through students. If students find it engaging, and they become the sort of catalyst for change, as it should be.
Wow, that's exciting. I wonder though, because not everyone has that approach to leadership that you do, because I've always been impressed that because often you hear stories about principals changing their tack because of resistance. There's so much resistance from parents or external to the staff that they back down, and I find that frustrating, even when the New South Wales education system proposes new curriculum and then they back down again because they're getting resistance from the wider community. And what I've always been impressed with you is that with that resistance, you're so willing to engage with the resistance that they tend to come around to you anyway. But that's not an easy thing. So I'm kind of curious, have you always been like that, or where did that come from? Was there a shift in your educational journey to kind of go, oh, okay, I've got to be this sort of leader?
I think it's a bit of both, Jo. I think part of it is probably my sort of development through life, I suppose, and I've been lucky in that I've sort of been exposed to leadership from a very, very young age.
Right.
So I've always looked at the importance of establishing a vision, etc., etc., etc. That's part of it. But I think as well, I think at your core, if you really believe in what you're doing, and you're happy to have those conversations, and you may well make slight sort of changes along the way. That you have to be open to being vulnerable as well. To think maybe I'm not completely right. But I think you have to, as long as if you've done enough thinking and you've committed to a lot of dialogue in the first instance, and then you're quite happy to have those open conversations, I think there's a sort of authenticity about what you're doing that means that if you sort of steer from that path because of other voices, then you're not being authentic to yourself, or more importantly, to the students. Because if you really believe what good learning is, then that is the driver for you, no matter what obstacles come along the way.
Yeah. So let's go back a bit, Jamie. Then, how long have you been in education? Was being a teacher your first job, or what did you do before? Or
No. In fact, I think if some of my teachers from high school knew I was a teacher, a teacher, they'd pass out. Principal, they'd probably just collapse completely. Yeah, look, it was very different. I went to a military boarding school for 7 years.
Wow.
So that's from the age of 11 to 18, and it had such a profound effect on me. It certainly shaped who I am today. It would be the biggest influence on my life for sure, for good and for bad. And some of the teachers there also profoundly influenced me, again, for good and for bad. But I'm still, like many people, still very close to many of the friends I made there. It was a school that was a sort of a place where the next step really was to be an officer in the army. So lots of my friends are officers in the armed forces stationed here, there, and everywhere. They're sort of colonels, etc., or brigadiers or whatever, here, there, and everywhere. So so I was all destined to sort of have a career in the army as an officer, until I realised I wasn't very good at just being told what to do.
I can see that.
It probably wasn't the ideal fit for me, but it taught me a lot about leadership.
Right.
And even from a young age, I remember being taught at school, because obviously, had I gone to the army, I would have been an officer by the time I was sort of 19 or 20. And I said, well, you'll be commanding people whose lives will be in your hands. That's how serious. So sort of the serious side of leadership was really sort of put onto me from an early age. And I suppose what I loved about school was, we underwent a lot of tasks, from doing exercises over mountains, and you were covered in all sorts of sheep dung and stuff like that, and it's 4 a.m. and you'd all just start singing to each other, so and having a bit of a laugh. So although there was, as you can imagine, there was a seriousness and a sort of style to a military school, there was also a lot of humor and a lot of sort of lightheartedness to get you through those difficult times, and that's always very much stuck with me. And then moving on from there, do you want me to keep going?
Well, I was just kind of curious, because I was thinking it's just like so the opposite of what you've created at St. Christopher's. It's so interesting, because you're saying it's so inspiring, and that you learn about leadership, and yet, and I know that there's a difference between, say, primary, elementary than there is high school, but what you've created at St. Christopher's, I would not describe as military. So what's the, I'm curious about that.
I think there are lots of other experiences from that. So from the school, I then kind of went and explored different. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to be in the army, but I didn't know what else I wanted to do. So I was in advertising, sales, and then I worked for the government. I worked for the Ministry of Defence for 5 years, and I was answering parliamentary questions and writing parliamentary briefs for ministers, which was quite bizarre, really.
Britain or in Australia?
In England. So some of my sort of work is in Hansard, which I still find quite amusing, really. And then Treasury. So those kind of life experiences for 10 years of working in the corporate government and non-government sectors influenced me heavily as well in terms of leadership. So I guess I've always been interested in leadership, and what is effective leadership and what is ineffective leadership, no matter what the organisation is, whether it's military, whether it's corporate, public, whatever. For me, good leadership is good leadership. And the people I've met along the way, I suppose, have been a massive influence on me. From my Welsh housemaster, who's one of the sort of fairest people I've ever met in my life, through to a crazy South African finance director who wanted to fire me every day. They've all had different levels of influence, good or bad, on me. And I think that's important to know in terms of teachers as you're starting out in your careers. that everyone's an influence on you, and it's a question of how you use those influences for the good in terms of educating students.
Yeah. Have you had to stop yourself? I mean, I know I have sometimes, because you realise you're repeating patterns or negative patterns that, as you say, you're being taught as a student, and then you repeat these kind of negative patterns in the classroom. So when, have you had to kind of stop? Did you realise you were doing something at some stage and went, oh, this isn't effective and I've got to switch my tactic here?
Yeah. I can tell you a really bad lesson if you like. Yeah. My favourite bad lesson, I think I might have said this to students before, it was a real brainwave of mine, and I was at St Michael's, Balcombe Hills, and we were doing a PDHP lesson on smoking.
Right.
And I thought it'd be a really smart idea to actually make some cigarettes and write "don't smoke" on them. Yeah, so all the students were walking around the school with these cigarettes. So that was great. Yeah, and I guess you've got to own your mistakes, and learn from them. We've all got them in our in our backpacks somewhere along the lines where we've stuffed up. But it's like learning. Learning is learning from your mistakes.
Yeah. That's quite funny. So what then made you decide to be a teacher?
Well, I'd always thought about it.
A lot more money, can I say? Parliamentary questions.
I at the time, I remember talking to someone about the financial suicide I was committing, really. But yes. My last job before I went to go back, or to go to uni, I was working in the Futures back office in Deutsche Bank in Sydney, as it happened. And it was a life of Friday afternoon drinks and cab charges and profit and loss accounts and commodities and etc. And I'd always thought about being a teacher when I was younger, but I was afraid. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to study. I wouldn't be any good at university. I wasn't capable. I didn't do very well at school, and I didn't think that I had the capacity to study and complete a degree. And then it got to a point when I remember looking at this is terrible. I was looking out at Sydney Harbour. Probably should have been working, but I was looking out at Sydney Harbour from my office.
Yeah.
So it's quite a nice office, and I realised personally, just making lots of money was never going to appeal to me, and I really wanted to be able to look back in my life one day and say, I might have helped someone along the way, someone make a better decision, set them on a decent path to sort of help other people. And that became the most important driving force for me.
Yeah.
And, so then I went back into Goldsmiths College in the University of London and started studying. And I've never regretted. There's nothing worse than going to work, no matter how much money you earn. I've got plenty of friends in this position, hating your job. And then you're caught in a sort of lifestyle trap of mortgages and children and private schools and everything else like that. But you have to keep doing your job. Whereas there's never been my worst day in education has probably been better than my best day outside of education.
Yeah, wow. I've got goosebumps. Yeah, that's amazing. But that's a huge thing, really, too. And I think it's kind of one of the things that really frustrates me around the time that ATAR results are released, and that's the New South Wales final year 12 exam that goes into, for students to be in university. And every year you get the front page of the paper that says teachers ATAR is 50 or 60, and we are getting the worst of the worst in front of the teachers. And it frustrates me because me personally, I didn't get a great ATAR either. Like, I was pretty good at school. I enjoyed school, but I was so busy doing, as you can imagine, doing theatre productions. I was in the debating teams, mock trial. Like, that was my year 12 life, and I don't regret any of it, but it meant that my ATAR wasn't great. I scraped into uni doing a BA and then was getting HDs and Ds because I loved it. I was doing what I loved. And so I think that's quite a thing for students to get over, what you had to get over of, I'm not smart enough to study, and that's a huge thing, your own self-belief in your own ability to not only study, but then be a leader of learning in the classroom. that would have been massive for you to get over.
Yeah, the ATAR one's an interesting one, and I kind of, I suppose, Joe, I wonder, had I started, you know, when I speak to my children, I always say, you know, I wish I'd studied hard at school, I wish I'd done better, and I wish I'd gone straight to uni.
Yeah.
But then maybe that wasn't the right time for me. Maybe uni wasn't the right option for me at 18 when I was kind of clueless. So on the one hand, I think the ATAR has a place in terms of, I still believe we have to be seen as a profession at attracting the very best people, whatever the best people look like.
Yeah.
Do I think there is a space for people who perhaps, you know, are, you know, don't do well at school to enter teaching? Absolutely, I do. Maybe they need some life experience first, like I did, and then into the teaching force. But at the same time, I'm wary of not placing any importance on intelligence, and not that the ATAR defines intelligence, but I think there needs to be something to show that, look, you know what, we do have people, you know, to be a teacher, you do need to be able to spell, you do need to be able to write a coherent sentence and have decent numeracy skills. So just on that though, you know, my daughter's just gone to uni this year, and she got early entry into all the unis, and I think that process in itself really sort of stemmed the levels of stress in terms of her HSC. So I do think there's a better way of university entrance than this stress-laden HSC ATAR process that we have in Australia, because we didn't need it much last year, and yet everyone's still going to university. And
that's right. And they're fine. And I guess that's what I mean, is that the ATAR as a number isn't an indication of even if you are good at schoolwork or not. Because if the early entry had been around when I was at school, I probably would have gotten early entry, because I did all right in my assignments. But when it came to the test, I just didn't study. So, you know, and I was never great at test. I mean, I got better as I got older, but it's kind of this, it's interesting because sometimes the teachers I teach at, or the students I teach at university, you know, some of the ones that, you know, just scraped in can be the better teachers because they have this kind of appreciation for what it takes. And I think that's what, you know, some of the students who come in with really high ATARs and very passionate don't always understand that, you know, don't understand the complexity of learning that it takes for a student in the classroom. That's right. And again, I think goes back to what I was sort of talking right at the beginning. I don't think there's one way. I don't think there's one answer. I think there needs to be multiple entrance points. I love the idea of, aside from guys coming straight out of school and going to uni, that's awesome. I also love, you know, mature age students too, with some different life experiences. Teaching should be for anyone, because you know, students can learn from anyone who's a great educator. So what is a great educator for you then, Jamie? What are the features of a good educator?
It's a great question, and I couldn't tell you how many interviews I've done for teachers, and but what I do know is probably within the first 5 minutes I can tell those who are really going to be outstanding. I pride myself or ourselves in this school of really having attracted the very best teachers out there. What do I think is a good I suppose passion is most important. There's no substitute for passion. If you come into an interview and you don't even sound like you like teaching, then I don't even know, you know, I've tuned off. If I can't see your love of learning, if I can't see your love of educating, then it's a non-starter for me. As you say, it doesn't matter if you're a 99.95 ATAR person. If you can't show me passion, then you're not going to be the sort of teacher that's going to inspire me, or more importantly, the students at this school. So I think that's number one. You need to be articulate. You need to be able to the job of teaching. Here I am stuttering. The job of teaching is to talk, is to interact, is to form relationships. So you need to be able to talk and interact. And actually, the one I just mentioned there is actually the most important one of all, relationships.
Yeah.
Relationships is absolutely the number one. Passion should be relationships, then passion. The two kind of go together anyway. And that's in everything. That doesn't even obviously, perhaps even more so in leadership.
Yeah.
If you can't form effective relationships, how are the students going to have a connection with you? So, and I know, interviews can be daunting, they can be scary. Absolutely, they are for all of us at any level. But forming those relationships straight away is so critical. At St. Christopher's, we always say in the first 3 or 4 weeks, we're not really so worried about what you're achieving in terms of the curriculum content. What we do want you to do is to really know your children. Be able to, if I pointed to someone in your class role, that you could talk about them, not just their learning, but something about them as human beings. So relationships, passion, I mean, I could go on all day, and then everything else.
And we can. But people might turn the podcast off. But I mean, I know for me, I always say with relationships, I always say to my students, whose story didn't you hear today? As a way to check in at the end of the day, whose story didn't I hear, or who didn't I connect with, and be okay with that. It's impossible in one day, there's so much going on you might miss. But if you can reflect on that, who haven't I spoken to, who haven't I checked in with, whose story didn't I hear, then you can go, okay, tomorrow I'll make sure I connect with that student who I missed today. So as a way to kind of ensure that those relationships are just, keep going.
Yeah, and I do a similar thing, Jo. Halfway through the year, I tend to say to the teachers, take your class roll and see if you can look at every single name and name 3 things about them that's got nothing to do with education.
Yeah, wow.
And it's a great little exercise to see how well you know your students.
Yeah.
The other thing I always do to them is I always say, can you spend an hour and find out how many times you asked a question, how many times the students asked a question. Yeah.
That's great. What type of responses do you get from the teachers with that?
With which one?
Both.
Well, the first one, it's funny that we always talk about it every year on the leadership team. And they always say, let's remind everyone about that, because it's easier to slip into when I say the daily grind of teaching, but I mean, the programming, the teaching, the assessing, the programming, the teaching, and then, forgetting about the most important thing of all, which is the relationships. How are the students going? How's their well-being? Because without that, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So the teachers are really good with that, in terms of, we spent like this, as you would know as a parent here, in week 3, we have a getting to know your child interview for all parents, so that it helps the teachers just kind of get to know, the parents' perspective on their children, as well as having the children's perspective on themselves too. And in terms of the questioning one, that's just a pedagogical thing that is a constant challenge, I think, because like I'm now, teachers can be very verbose, and it's just important to remember that good learning is actually making sure that the students are being curious about their learning, rather than we're just sort of rabbiting on like I do.
That's why you're the principal.
Yeah, got kicked out.
Not in the classroom. One of the things I've been wondering, I mean, the last couple of years I've noticed my teaching's gotten better when I've been better in my relationships outside of work. So, within my family, even just within my brothers and sisters, within my work, so when I'm talking about in the classroom, if I can manage the relationships outside of the, lecture theatre with my colleagues and with at home, and then I'm a better teacher. I mean, have you seen any of that? And what kind of, we talk a lot about students as, teaching the whole student, right? But sometimes I wonder about whether we are really checking in with teachers as whole teachers, not just who they are in the classroom, but who they are in their life, and what kind of, how that is being affected and impacted in the classroom.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's a big challenge. Funny enough, I don't know if it's suitable for this podcast, but I'll say it anyway. We were about to appoint a leader of diverse learning and wellbeing, And in terms of the well-being, it will be around both student and staff well-being.
Yeah, great.
Because you know, on the one hand, we always say to our teachers, and this is important, no matter what is happening in your life, you need to slap on that teaching face and, you know, put on your act and away you go.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, it is important to acknowledge what is happening in people's lives and see how we can help them along the way. But I think you're right. I think if you are, it's quite natural that if you're having problems with relationships outside of school, no matter how hard you try, it's pretty tough to not have it impact you whatsoever. And you know, Joe, I suppose the word that has become much stronger in the vernacular with me anyway is vulnerability. How open are you to being vulnerable in terms of your learning, in terms of yourself as a human being, and you know, are you prepared to ask other people for help?
Yeah. And the expectation we have of students in the classroom, they be collaborative, or to, as you say, ask for help, or to be open about their learning struggles or their struggles with their friendships. And often we aren't like that, you know, in the staff room, or we're not like that, you know, with our colleagues, but we expect so much of the students.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what does collaboration mean anyway? I mean, my favorite definition of collaboration is the ability to add, edit, or delete anything, because that is true. That is absolutely true collaboration. Otherwise, it's cooperation or it's coordination. So you know, even in terms of collaboration, what is truly collaborative in your classroom, or even in your workspace, or even on your leadership team, or in your staff. So, but you're absolutely right. How do you model authenticity in terms of what you say and what you do? You know, do you walking the talk, etc.
Yeah. What about you? Have you had to, you know, shift anything yourself as a leader, or, you know, do you have an example?
Yeah.
Vulnerability.
Don't ask my wife. Yeah.
I will. I'm going to interview her too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know what, it's funny you should say that, because there's an educational consultant called Tom Barrett, and I do a lot of work. We do a lot of work at St. Christopher's with him, and he's my coach as well, so I do a bit of work with him too. And I think having somebody else who can actually be a critical friend and give you honest feedback is absolutely critical, whether you're starting out as a teacher, or whether you've been a principal for donkey's years, whatever it is. You know, you need to actually have somebody else be able to bounce ideas off, or to perhaps give you some home truths, and you need to be open to that. And that's been a big learning for me, to be able to sort of, you know, look at how I do things and see if I can, you know, change it up. And I suppose it's also, Joe, not always looking to somebody else, looking within yourself. So when in a difficult situation, are you kind of fueling it, or are you trying to, you know, sort it out?
Yeah, so true. So I have a coach too, and that, it's the, you know, you think you're going great, and then you talk to the coach and you're like, oh yeah, you missed. I mean, you're still going great, but you know, it sharpens that. You know, you can, particularly as a leader, you can get a bit overconfident, I think, particularly if things are going well and you're like, oh yeah, the classroom's going well, my teaching's going well with my colleagues, and then that you can, you know, get a bit cocky, and so that, you know, a coach or you know, advisor or someone can kind of pull yourself up. And as you say, if you're being honest with yourself, you know, you kind of, you know it before the coach even says it, because you go,
exactly. I'm going to give you an example, right? So I'm going to show you something, and you'll like this, because you're a lifey, coachy kind of person. This is, I don't know if you can see that, right? So they're my steps, okay? All the steps here are pre-dogs. All the steps after there are post-dogs. So just in terms of translation, there's a point to this. My average for 2021 in terms of steps is currently about 11,500 steps a day, whereas my average in 2020 was 7,000 steps a day. Now, what does that tell me about me? What it actually tells me is if somebody else is if somebody else is relying on me, then I'll actually do something about it. But if I just rely on myself, it goes back exactly what you just said. I tend to maybe be complacent, maybe get lazy, maybe rest on my laurels. And the same goes for my coaching. Like, here we go. I've got a book on my desk, Daring Greatly by Brene Brown.
Fantastic.
And I have to finish it by Thursday because I promised my coach 3 weeks ago it would be done. So it's going to be no more watching the Vikings. It's going to be
opening up the book.
Are we getting the finishing off the book? Because I know innately that unless I have somebody else who has an expectation of me, then I will just make all the excuses under the sun and go about things myself. So whether even as a teacher, it's it's when you always have your grade buddies to rely on you, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
If you don't have a grade buddy, then find someone.
Yeah.
Because I know from my own experience, and not everyone's the same. Lots of people are way more self-disciplined than me. But if I know someone else is relying on me, then I'll step up.
That's so great, and it's so true. And I think that's something I've been really present to last year. And so is that when you make goals that are just about yourself, you don't do it. I think well, you don't go as far as what you would have when you start making the goals about your family, or who you have to be in your family, or who you have to be as a colleague or a teacher. When you make those goals for other people, and and I think teaching you have to be, if you want to be a teacher, you really are giving yourself to this community of little humans, and you're saying to them, I'm going to guide you, I'm going to inspire you. And so if you're not being the best you can be, and I think someone like a coach or a leader or advisor pushes you beyond your own limitations as well. You think you're here, but a coach sees where you can go, or an advisor can see how big you can be for others, I think.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Jamie, it has been absolutely fantastic, and I think there's so much more there I could have spoken to you about, and it'd be great to switch notes, I think, on coaching. That could be a whole other podcast series, in fact.
Well, there's certain aspects of your coaching I definitely need, and you just have to look on the screen to know which parts I'm talking about.
Well, maybe we can swap for a bit or something. You can speak to Tom and you can speak to Dean. So thanks Jamie for your time. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your just amazing ability to say yes to challenges, and to say yes to people. And I think the way you show up for your teachers and for your school community is just so inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing your insights today, and thank you for who you are for me and for my students.
No, thanks, Joe. Thanks to you. Thanks for always pushing the boundaries, because all you're doing is modelling what we want from others. So it's fantastic.
Thanks so much. Thanks.